Hey, my name is Richard Kannwischer, and I am here with my good friend,
René Schlaepfer.
And we're here to talk about Cultivate, how God grows the fruit of the Spirit in us. René, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, well, we're filming this here in Santa Cruz, California, which is where I pastor a church called Twin Lakes Church. It's a vibrant, very stereotypically California neighborhood. You know, a lot of people, Rich, think of California, they think of hippies and surfers and redwood trees and palm trees and all of that. None of that is true of most of California. It's 110% true of Santa Cruz, classic California beach town, and I love it. It is a great place to be in ministry.
So René is one of my favorite hippies in all of history. Excited to share with you, and so welcome to Cultivate. René, welcome back. And this period of time, we're talking about the second fruit of the Spirit. We're talking about joy.
Joy.
And when I was thinking about starting off the book on Cultivate and how God grows the fruit of the Spirit in us, there was a story that I learned from co-speaking with you one time about Dan Adragna. And I would love for you to just, in your own words, tell that story.
Well, Dan is a great guy. So Dan became a believer at our church. He had been going through a rough time, going through a divorce. He was a single dad raising two teenagers. And self-made man, though, doing great as an electrician. And he was driving to our church Christmas Eve services one Christmas, and he got a nagging cough. Just couldn't get control of it. And his teenage daughter at the time said, Dad, you should go get this checked out. No, I'm fine. Just couldn't get a breath, though. So he actually, on his way to church, pulls into the emergency lane of our local hospital here and gets out and goes to sit down in the waiting room of the ER and falls over, passes out because he had gone into a coma from which he didn't emerge for over 2 months. It was the last day of February before Dan emerges from that coma. While in the coma, he codes, that is flatlines, basically dies and has to be resuscitated 3 times. He develops gangrene from this, it turns out to be viral pneumonia that all the doctors and nurses told me, this is going to kill Dan, get the family ready, he's not going to make this. Jim Henson died of the same kind of viral pneumonia. Just recently, another actress died of it. And so he was a goner as far as everybody knew, but they were able to just barely keep him alive. But then he develops gangrene. And because of the gangrene, they have to start amputating parts of his body. All the toes on his right foot, then all the toes on his left foot, then his right foot, then his left foot, then his right leg, then his left leg, parts of his face. He's just being carved to bits. But he hangs on in a coma. And then last day of February, I get a call at work. Dan just woke up with no medical intervention, no brain damage, no cognitive damage, as it turns out. Dan's eyes blinked and he looked down in the hospital room. The last thing he remembered was being on the way to church for Christmas Eve. Now, the next day on the calendar is March 1st, and his body is what I just described to you. How would you respond to that? Completely true story. I go in and I'm all ready to comfort somebody I'm sure is going to be racked with sorrow. I'm expecting that would be understandable. And I sit down on his bed and I say, hey, Dan, buddy, how are you doing? And he says, well, René, I woke up, looked down and realized I'm not half the man I used to be. That was his first line out of his mouth. Dan always had this effervescent joy since he had become a Christian. It continued to just bubble up out of him even after this. Dan told me, René, that these are the cards I was dealt. And there's nothing I can do about it. I got to make the best of it now. Of course, he grieved the change in his lifestyle. Of course, there were times it was frustrating and difficult. But his joy in the Lord was his guiding star. He got fitted with prosthetic legs. When he had long pants on, you could not tell that they were prosthetics. He could walk, skip, leap with those prosthetics on. But that got him into trouble sometimes. He comes up to me before our first service of the weekend is on Saturday night. He says, René, I just gotta tell you what happened to me at the amusement park. we have a local amusement park where there's a ride called Invertigo, and it's a suspended roller coaster where the track is above you. When you sit down, your legs dangle, and the seats are arranged so that you're facing the person you're riding with. So Dan sits
Something like
down.
sharing the terror.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, yeah.
Watching each other scream in abject terror. So Dan sits down and he's facing about a fourth grade girl who he's never seen before in his life. And he's wearing his prosthetics. As far as she knows, they're just real legs. And hey, how's it going? And she doesn't say anything, very shy. Well, the ride launches out of the gate at full speed, like some of these modern roller coasters do. And Dan tells me that it's 3, 2, 1, launch. And instantly his legs whip back over his shoulders at a biologically impossible angle. The soles of his shoes are facing the other direction. And he's just, whoa! And the little girl's looking across like, I cannot believe my eyes. Then the track goes through all these loops and twists and turns. And Dan tells me his legs, now loosened, are just pinwheeling around like the Roadrunner's legs in a Warner Brothers cartoon. And then when the track goes up into thin air, just boom, and it stops. That's the way the ride goes. The track stops and then it goes backwards through all the loops and twists and turns. When it stopped in midair, Dan's legs shot out of his pants into the clear blue California sky. As I say, torpedo tube 1, psh, torpedo tube 2, psh, just launching. And now they're going backwards. Dan is now facing the little girl and she's moving forwards. And Dan says his now empty pant legs are just whipping toward her like flags in a stiff breeze, just blah, 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 blah. He says she's now screaming, hanging on to her own legs. Lord, no, no. Finally, the ride stops. The safety restraints are released, and she runs away screaming, thinking she has just seen somebody's legs come off on the roller coaster. Dan's not going anywhere, of course. He's waiting until they find his legs. And I said, well, Dan, why didn't you tell her that they were prosthetic legs so she wasn't so terrorized? And here's his answer. René, I tried to, but I was laughing too hard to even get a breath. This is his response to life is joy. And Dan parlayed that joy into ministry. Dan ended up working for a couple of different organizations that help the special needs community, including overseas, helping people with special needs, especially amputees, get wheelchairs, learn how to deal with life. He had amazing opportunities to share his faith with that community all over the world because he's one of them. And he tells me, René, I would never have had this kind of global impact with my life if not for God taking this terrible tragedy that happened to me and turning it into something good. But as he was saying that to me, I thought, that's true. God can do amazing things through our tragedy. But really what got Dan's heart ready, open for that opportunity, was his joyful outlook. He wasn't just grieving. He wasn't just looking backward. Joy gives you a forward lean in life to see what God has for you. And I learned a lot in my life by watching how Dan Adragna navigated all these challenges. Dan passed away last year, and his dear wife, Melinda, is still a very close friend of ours, and their children. Dan's joy is really still what's getting his family through, because they know that he was grounded in the joy of the Lord.
So good. I love that portrait. I love that story of it. A skeptic might hear that story and say, that's a particular personality type. How do we differentiate? I mean, I think when you're dealing with love, it's pretty clear that love is a verb, love's an action, it's a commitment to will the good of the other person. But when it comes to joy, it's so easily like, well, that's a joyful person and I'm a little more serious, or whatever the case may be. How do you pick that apart?
Well, I mean, of course, when we're talking about the fruit of the Spirit being joy, there you're not really talking just about a personality type. This is something that comes from living in the Spirit. And Dan would tell you, if Dan were here, that he was not that personality type before he became a follower of Jesus Christ, that he could be morose, and he could be self-pitying, and he could be self-centered. But then when he found Jesus and found that the grace of Christ forgave him of his sins and gave him hope for the future, he told me, René, my life is like a living example of Romans chapter 8, where God has been with me through it all, and where God has forgiven. Not only is there now no condemnation for me in Jesus Christ at the beginning of Romans 8, but I mean, he literally told me my whole life is a living example of Romans 8, but also nothing can separate me from the love of Jesus. He said that just became internalized into me when I became a Christian. And I keep thinking every day my life proves that that's true. So it was a perspective shift for him. It was not a personality type for Dan.
And I love how you're talking about how there is a connection between love and joy. Like
Yeah.
joy is the most logical thing in the world if
right.
we come to terms with how deeply
right.
and dearly we are loved. If we really understood and grasp and receive the kind of love that's been offered to us, the most natural thing in the world would be to respond to that with joy.
Think of the times in your life when you've been in love, in the classic sense of being with your wife for the very first time. You're dating, holding hands, and your heart is aflutter, and you love her and she loves you. What is the natural byproduct of that? It is joy. We just have had our 7th grandchild in 8 years, and holding those little ones, just loving them, all. You just feel love just radiating from yourself. They're like little magnets that draw love out of you.
They're way better than kids, right?
And-
Isn't that what people say?
Oh,
Grandkids?
100 times better. Absolutely. You only have kids so that you can have grandkids. But the joy that love brings, joy is just a byproduct of both receiving love and giving love. And so you're right. Those two follow naturally.
They do. And the Bible commands us to not just love one another. It commands us to rejoice.
Yeah,
like
that's right.
over and over again in the Psalms, in the letters, the most famous of which, rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again, rejoice. He says it once and he knows that we need to hear it again.
Right.
And we need to be able to offer it. What do you think some practical things that we could do to help to cultivate joy in our lives?
It's interesting that you brought up Philippians, right? I think it's the book of the Bible that mentions the word joy more than any other. Joy is just in there, like, I think somebody counted like every 5th verse on average. And yet, think of the context that it was written in.
Prison.
It's written in prison. Paul's thinking he's probably going to die. He has been through something like 4 shipwrecks by that point. He's been beaten. He's been slandered. And yet it's just suffused with joy, which tells me that it's not just about your circumstances. It's about what you choose to think about. My wife is so good at this. She just has a saying that you have to be very aware of negative internal monologue, and you have to be very proactive about a positive internal monologue. What is your internal monologue? We all narrate our own lives.
What's the story you're telling yourself?
Here I am about to blow it. Here I am being really nervous before I talk with Rich on a podcast. I probably am not going to make sense. Or this is going to be fun. Rich is my friend. This is going to be a blast. And I hope people who watch get something out of it, but we're going to have a lot of fun. It's good to see my old friend again. What's your internal monologue? I think to be aware of a negative internal monologue, my life never turns out the way, look, I have to do all the work around this house and nobody appreciates me at work. I think it's good to be conscious of that, and also to be proactive about a positive internal monologue based in Scripture. God loves me. God loves me unconditionally. God has promised to empower me to do his will. God doesn't make his will a trick, difficult to discern. God has laid out what his will is for me in his life, to follow Jesus and to share the love of Christ. if that's your internal monologue, you will have joy. One time recently, I was monologuing, and it wasn't even internal. It was an external monologue with my wife. I just was complaining about one thing after another, telling her I feel drained and I feel upset, and nobody appreciates me and everything's going wrong. What had happened was I had woken up on Sunday morning with complete laryngitis. I mean, I could not talk. So I'm thinking, if I get my voice back, I'm going to have to rasp my way through the sermon, which is what I did. And then we had a couple of videos in the sermon or the service, including video announcements, and they didn't work. And the monitors didn't work, so the musicians couldn't hear themselves. And to top it all off, we had to call the sheriff's department because there was a guy out on the parking lot rifling through cars. And he was telling people, it's okay, René has instructed me to examine all vehicles for explosives. I mean, it was just a nutty Sunday. And I was mad. And I can see the humor in it now, but I was just in such a bad mood. I'm trying to do your best, Lord, and to do your will, and yet everything's going wrong. And my wife graciously listened to me monologuing about all of this stuff, because you do have to vent sometimes. But then she did point out, and I'm glad she did, René, are you aware of your negative internal monologue? And I know I'm just hearing the tip of the iceberg. You're just reciting your list of complaints. And can you be a little bit more proactive about a positive internal monologue based in, the guy was caught, the guy didn't steal anything. We actually invited him to come back to church with us. We were able to be gracious with us, and the service went off without a hitch. I was able to croak out a sermon. I think that is so much a part of joy. That's how you can be more joyful, no matter what this. I think it's Viktor Frankl who said, the famous Jewish survivor of Auschwitz,
Right.
who said, you can take everything from me. You can take my livelihood, you can take my money, you can take my wife, you can take my children, but you cannot take one thing: how I choose to respond to my circumstances. And I think that at its root, that's the key to joy. Am I going to choose to respond by basing my response in the truth of God's love for me? Or am I going to respond, viscerally in my natural sinful self?
I think it's so critical to understand what is the story that's running around in my narrative of my mind, the movie of my mind, and how we're constantly looking for somebody to affirm the way that we see things, as opposed to being in a position of being able to offer a glimpse of the bigger reality. I find, for me personally, when my joy gets zapped, not that I'm having a bad afternoon or whatever the case may be, but it's zapped, it's always a profound lack of perspective in being able to see God, his work, the kingdom happening before me. And I love how the Bible likens the joy of the Lord to as strength. Like it literally is a form of a power in that regard.
That's right. It is so powerful. But Rich, you just said something brilliant again, which was that we're constantly looking for confirmation of our own internal dialogue. Don't you feel like that's easier to do now more than ever? Because we can, on social media or on news headlines or on some blog post, we can find, in fact, we're being driven algorithmically toward echo chambers of how we feel. And usually it's how upset we feel. Don't you feel like more than ever?
I would almost think today the opposite, functionally speaking, the opposite of joy today is outrage.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
That's the way it manifests itself.
That's right.
You can be joyful in whatever the goodness of what you're able to see and experience and that kind of thing. We choose the skepticism and the pessimism of outrage.
Well, and it's being driven by the media. I was talking to a local politician who has worked on national campaigns, and he's a great guy, very funny, joyful person. But I said, why are you running campaigns that, don't reflect that personality? The campaigns, all the national
so
campaigns
negative,
are
right?
so negative, fear-driven. And he said, well, René, because the happy campaigns don't work. They do not work as well as fear-driven campaigns.
Yeah.
He said, you will never see a campaign anymore that's not fear-driven, because that's what brings out the voters.
And that's not just true in American politics. I won't mention names, but I recall somebody who was involved in parachurch ministry, and when a flashpoint issue of abortion or homosexuality or something would come up, it was almost a source of pride, knowing that could be leveraged for greater fundraising or greater types of things. Like, we tap into that outrage as opposed to relishing in what the joy. And look, there are some things in this world that are worthy of a righteous discontent and anger. And at the same time, we certainly need to know that just as what we said, in the last episode about that they'll know that we are his followers by our love, the most consistent accusation of Jesus and his followers by the people around him is that they were gluttons. And so there was this joy that followed Jesus wherever they go. I know you and I share a passion for learning about Egypt as a backdrop. My favorite detail in the Exodus story is, we all know the "let my people go," but that's not the end of the sentence. The sentence is, "let my people go so that they may give festival to me in the wilderness."
Ooh, I love that.
So the feast, and if Jesus' most common description, the kingdom of heaven is like a banquet, a celebration, a party. I mean, we just need to understand that joy is such an integral part of what it means to live in the reality of God's kingdom.
Well, and when you are driving people with fear absolutely, sadly, will win elections, but fear's not going to win you a lot of friends.
No, it will not.
People are drawn to you, Rich, I think because you're funny and you're nice and you're a joyful person. I mean, you really are. I know you. That's how you are. And that's what makes you attractive. If you know somebody who's constantly angry and is good at stoking fear, maybe they're going to get a lot of social media followers, but I bet they don't have a lot of actual friends. And I think that's what makes the difference between a vital local church and a lot of followers on social media. What's going to draw people to Peachtree or to Twin Lakes Church, and I hear it over and over again. Wow, I went to church and everybody was so loving. There was so much joy. That's what's going to pull people into an actual community, into an actual fellowship in real life.
One of the defining moments of me coming back to faith from not being in the Christian faith anymore was, I knew that as long as I was fun and engaging, that it would work out. But if the wheels of my life fell off, there had to be a deeper joy. There had to be more to it than that.
That's right.
So René, thanks for helping us to rediscover our joy and also sharing with us the great Dan story. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rich.